And hello, it is 10:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Friday, August 25th, year 2023. My name is Mark Kulak, Houstonic.live. Check out the shows there, the full catalog, etc. We're going to just kind of get right down to business here on just a quick video that I'm just going to call why President Trump deserves a pass on Operation Warp Speed. Sounds like a kind of an intriguing title. I don't usually like to do these type of titles. I just like to say what it is, as opposed to this is why you should watch the video. But either way, so we know what Operation Warp Speed. We know that it was announced in I think it was late May of 2020. Operation Warp Speed was the military run, for the most part, operation which made vaccines available for the U.S. citizens, to make a vaccine product available to protect the U.S. citizens against the coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which caused the COVID-19 vaccine. The the announcement and the rollout and the implementation of Operation Warp Speed happened entirely under President Trump. There's absolutely no doubt about that. He was the person who announced it, etc. So, and because of there's some people, I'm going to try to keep the language as soft as possible so I can keep this video on YouTube for a while. Some people believe that the vaccines, may not have been as effective as initially hoped or initially as suggested. And this has been rolled up into the statements that Warp Speed is behind all of this, that Warp Speed made all of this possible, and therefore all of this, anything and all of it, which has gone wrong with respect to the response, should be put upon the Warp Speed operation and the president at that time, which was President Donald J. Trump. Now, I encourage people to not lose track of history. Again, history is the way you analyze history is not just by looking at the current narrative, looking back as to what we are supposed to think would happen, but to not lose track of context. What was said, when was it said, and who said it? What was the thinking at the time that certain things happen? That's how you can really understand history, as opposed to just looking at the summary, which usually is very prone to be manipulated. Now, the first thing to ask or to note is that COVID planning, first of all, the planning for a coronavirus started before President Trump's term. You could see a rapid planning or passage of a FDA act in December of 2016. This is legislation that had been written almost a year beforehand in 2015. You can see that there was the initial funding of CEPI, Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness and Innovations, through the World Economic Forum, was 2015, accelerated in 2016. Of course, you know about the Dr. Anthony Fauci speech at Georgetown. It was like the day after the inauguration of President Trump into office, saying that Trump should expect a surprise pandemic. We know about the elevation or the promotion of the previous BARDA director, Richard Hatchett, into the role of being a director of CEPI, and that role at BARDA was backfilled by future Robert Malone, a boss, if you will, Rick Bright. And all of this shows that there was some potential premeditation for coronavirus before the Trump administration even started. And of course, you can look at the last 10, 20 years of movies had all prepared us for something like this, whether it was natural, whether it was a lab or a market or whatever. All the papers show that there was some level of premeditation there. Now, aside from that, throughout the year 2014, 15 and early 2016, all the talk was actually about Zika virus and how Zika virus was causing microcephaly, allegedly, or increased levels of microcephaly in some areas in South America. Zika virus was described as a virus which had been in Africa for who knows how long, somehow migrated across the Pacific, now is causing these problems. And it is asymptomatic to adults and to everyone else except for these birth defects, which it has caused. And good news, there were vaccines being developed and made available. And those vaccines include DNA and mRNA from Moderna, from Inovio, from CureVac. There were a few others escape me right now. But there were already, and matter of fact, it was the same companies and many of the same individuals representing those products that were already prepared to help protect people against Zika virus. And the big winner, the big plan, was that the Zika virus vaccine, as it had been proven more and more effective, was really supposed to be targeted at women of childbearing age. And it was going to cause, we believe, or as it was sold, genetic augmentation to the unborn or the not yet conceived to protect them against potential microcephaly. And now here we are into the pandemic, and mRNA technologies, or vaccine technologies, transfection technologies, are now being described as of value to protecting the unborn or the not yet conceived against RSV and other future diseases. So we have much of the same vaccine strategy, same products, same companies, same individuals representing them, not to mention the fact that you could see and the Zika virus emergency from the World Health Organization actually ended 72 hours after the Trump administration started. Very, very odd timing. I suspect that the Trump victory was completely unplanned for. So, if the only way warp speed could have happened is if we had this COVID pandemic, then we should look at that. Well, what allowed this COVID pandemic to happen? And when you see all the premeditation, that all happened. That planning for that predates the President Trump administration. Now, the second bullet is probably the most, as if the first one isn't big enough. The second one is the one that you can use in conversation. We are told, should warp speed be held accountable? Warp speed, Trump's warp speed. Is this what caused all the problems? Okay. And it's easy to think, well, if it wasn't for warp speed, then we wouldn't have had all of these products that some have alleged haven't worked out that well. Okay. And the opposite of warp speed, though, was not nothing. Warp speed was not announced when COVID started. Warp speed was announced several months afterwards in May. That's when warp speed was announced. If warp speed was not announced, if there was no warp speed, what was the opposite of that? It was not COVID disappears. The opposite of warp speed was 18 to 24 months, 2 years of waiting for a transfection product. Okay. Well, why 2 years? You should ask why 2 years, because the products were already designed and already manufactured. We know this. The factories were already set up. The products were already made. They were already in storage for something that emerged unexpectedly. Do you really think that the products, which were already made, already in storage, and ready to go, were going to just sit in the freezer for another 2 years while they did ethical testing? Do you actually think that that was the plan? That is a ridiculous, absurd, illogical thing to be thinking. The opposite of warp speed was 18 to 24 months. now of waiting for the vaccine. Now, do you think the deaths would have stopped? Do you think people going to the hospital diagnosed with COVID would have stopped if there was no warp speed? How would people feel compelled to take the vaccine product in 18 to 24 months if people stopped dying? Think about it. They wouldn't have. They wouldn't have. They would have needed to feel sustained fear. Well, guess what? Before warp speed was put into effect, there was already a lineup of remdesivir and ventilation and PCR tests, so that if there was anything in your body that suggested you might have coronavirus, okay, you would be subject to these protocols. That is the opposite. That is what would have happened. Do you think that the products would have sat on the shelves for 2 years? The transfection products. I challenge that. I challenge that belief. It is my hypothesis. I speculate that was a 2-year window. That was predicted by Rick Bright. That was predicted by Anthony Fauci. That was predicted by many, many, many people, where Americans would have been exposed to unknowingly being subjected to medical experimentation of these mRNA products. And should something go wrong, guess what? They will show up positive on a PCR test, and then they can be given the full treatment plan. Oh my goodness, and then it shows up as another COVID death. The plan was not to take directly to the people and push these vaccine products. That was not the plan. The plan was to harvest people's willingness to wait a couple of years. And maybe when they go in for their flu shots or who knows what else, every once in a while, oops, it actually was an mRNA shot or something else. That is what was most likely to happen. And that is why when warp speed was announced, there was outrage, because the opportunity to have 18 to 24 months of non-consensual, non-declared use of the entire population to test this new era of medicines was lost. This is, I think, the real warp speed story. And it's the number 2 bullet here. The opposite of warp speed was not nothing. The opposite of warp speed was not COVID ends, no mRNA shots, back to life. The opposite of warp speed was not nothing. The opposite of warp speed was 18 to 24 months of continued fear, of continued protocols, and all the vaccines, which are now being given to people, ready to go in freezers. And they were probably not going to sit there. Do you really think that there was going to be a long ethical trial? Come on. Look, I have a very long list of things that I'm very disappointed about with the current the previous U.S. President, Donald Trump. There's no reason to make apologies for anything. However, he's not going to be on this world forever, and this isn't really about him. And I'm not going to allow this massive machine to offload one of the most hideous diabolical plans against the U.S. citizens onto one elderly, New York City billionaire who's probably only going to be here a few more years. Not going to allow it. No one is going to get off the hook. Sorry. The opposite of warp speed was not nothing. Not to mention, warp speed was already announced for Zika virus all the way back in 2015, early 2016. Read the Boston Globe papers. They haven't all been scrubbed. It was already announced. This is not really Trump's thing. This is something much, much, much bigger. Okay? Opposite of warp speed was not nothing. COVID planning predated the start of the Trump administration, and the opposite of warp speed was 2 years of waiting for a vaccine with all of the products which were going to be rolled out already manufactured, sitting in freezers. Do you really think that they were just going to let it sit there for 2 years while ethical trials went on? The answer is no, absolutely not, and you know that. So that's all, everyone. Quick 15-minute video. We'll continue with a reading starting really soon of the continuing on with the antibody patent paradox. Thank you, everyone for your support, and God bless.